Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Propanefitness podcast. This is episode 11, and with us today we have Alberto Nunez and Eric Helms from 3D Muscle Journey, and obviously I'm here with the other editor, Yusuf, as well. So guys, for those people who aren't aware of you, do you want to just give a brief introduction of who you are and your achievements in bodybuilding and powerlifting? So Eric, do you want to go first?
Sure. First off, big honor to be back, and thanks for having us. As far as who I am, I'm 1/4 of the four-headed beast that is 3D Muscle Journey. I've been someone who enjoys picking things up that are as heavy as I can lift for about the past 10 years. I've been competing in natural bodybuilding and raw powerlifting pretty much since the onset of that, maybe 2 years into it, and pretty quickly fell in love with, I guess, the practice and coaching side of it just as much as I did the competing side of it. So I've been pursuing my education in the area and working with clients for a long time as well. So I'd say as far as accolades, nothing crazy, but managed to win a professional status in the INBA back in 2011 as a natural bodybuilder. And I'm knocking on the door of a 400 Wilks as far as my raw powerlifting total. So I'm solid above average. And yeah, I'm pursuing my PhD currently in strength conditioning, looking at autoregulation. And I did a master's degree in essentially bodybuilding nutrition that I completed last year at an AUT. That's pretty much me.
Awesome. Alberto, do you want to go next?
You know, I think one thing that folks who do follow us don't really understand is that me and Eric haven't been competing for very long when you think about it. Especially when you compare it to Jeff Alberts, who's another 3D Muscle Journey coach. We both competed for the first time in 2007. Technically, I've only had 4 competitive bodybuilding seasons, so we're relatively new, and I think and powerlifting, kind of the same thing. I think we had our first meet in 2007. I think any success we have had within either sport, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've been very open to applying, I guess, stuff that works when it comes to our bodybuilding. I wouldn't consider myself genetically from Mars or anything, so it kind of just happened naturally that at a certain point we wanted to spew what we've been taught, because I think we were very fortunate in that our first contacts when we first started this, it was guys like Dr. Joe Klemczewski and Lane Norton. So we were very fortunate in our bodybuilding upbringing. And I think, a lot of that obviously led to some success on the stage and on the platform. After that, especially after in the West Coast, no one knew who these guys were, and we were so behind. So we took what we were doing, and we were doing pretty good for ourselves, and people started to take notice. So naturally, 3D Muscle Journey formed. And here we are today, both competitive athletes, but then also coaches. Yeah, that's our story.
I think you certainly can't overstate the importance of starting or hitting the ground running and knowing what the correct determinant inputs are from the beginning. I think both of us wasted a lot of time when we started training just following kind of muscle magazines and basically all the wrong inputs. As you guys say, a lot of trainees that train seriously do have the dedication, desire, discipline, but put it in the wrong channels and end up getting subpar results as a result. So you're relatively new to bodybuilding, and we've seen that you both bodybuild and powerlift, and there's a lot of crossover in both the inputs and the rewards that you get from that. What do you do to allow for the differences in programming and nutrition between the two sports?
I'll go first on this one because your situation was a bit more complicated for a minute there because you picked up a third sport, dude. So, I think for me it's pretty straightforward because, I'm going to have to get stronger and progress in the gym, and I mean that's the heart and soul of powerlifting. And I love the big lifts because to me, they're not just physically engaging, but the mental part of it, the technique part of it just really, I guess it keeps me engaged. Whereas a lot of the typical bodybuilding stuff like a hack squat, leg extension, it's kind of brainless, so I don't enjoy those too much. I think a lot of it has to do with enjoyment. You don't have to powerlift to be a great natural bodybuilder and vice versa. But I don't think they conflict as much as a lot of people think it might. Basically, my approach, and I think this would be the approach to most other folks, is for sure work on getting stronger on your big three. And in addition to that, the body parts that don't grow very well on their own without specific attention, those, and we all have those body parts. That's where the majority of my bodybuilding work goes towards. So it's really simple. It's a lot of big three lifting, and then I'll pick up the spares with isolation movements for body parts such as, my calves or triceps, things that just don't necessarily grow very well on their own.
So focusing on the powerlifting primarily and then filling up the remaining gaps with assistance movements, isolation. Because interesting you say that, because Eric is coaching both of us and he won't allow either of us to do curls or lateral raises, and all we want to do is get big arms, and he's just conned us into powerlifting.
Neither of us wanted to powerlift at all to begin with. We just wanted big arms and shoulders, and so yeah. No, we're obviously joking. But what about the nutrition side of things, Alberto? Do you find that powerlifting is more suited to off-season, and then when bodybuilding becomes more of a focus, you obviously get into a dieting phase, and then does training change with that? Or is it more or less the same throughout the off-season as well?
Regardless of whether I'm dieting or not, I think the only things that really do change is I just have to be a bit more realistic in regards to how much I can recover. That's probably the main difference. And I think now more than ever, and this is kind of off topic here, but I think that powerlifting, it's just not the same powerlifting that it was 10 years ago. I think we're getting to that point where I wouldn't say powerlifters are really concerned with, the way they don't want to look like a physique athlete, but they're paying a bit more attention to their nutrition, and they're seeing that, hey, I can be 20 pounds lighter than I used to be and just as strong, and if not stronger. And I think guys like, Bryce Lewis, and, even go as far as a guy like Dan Green, who, you look at his physique, you can't help but, as the kids say, admire, so you can have both. Yeah, I think to me, that's the main variable, is if I'm dieting or not. It just comes back to, how much can I realistically recover from.
Okay. Eric, do you want to cover your take on it? And then I understand that you took up weightlifting as well, Olympic weightlifting, so I imagine things changed again.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit I'll touch on some things Berto didn't cover, and then I'll give you the personal perspective. I think, powerlifting is a great vehicle because, in essence, you've got 3 lifts. One's a lower body lift, one's an upper body lift, and one's a full body lift. So they're in some form. Typically, most bodybuilders do a squat, a deadlift, and some kind of horizontal press regardless. So it's really just, a vehicle you could use. And the more we come to understand about what the roots of hypertrophy are, and then it's just volume, we start to go, I could get my volume with lower reps on those 3 lifts and more sets. Then, pick apart and attack my physique with the isolation movements like Berto was saying, and focus on the supplementaries. So I think it's actually a pretty dang easy fit to mesh bodybuilding with powerlifting, especially when, with some of the things that come along with dieting for a long period of time, and the realities of being a natural bodybuilder who takes a long period to make progress. A lot of our athletes don't compete every year. We don't compete every year just because, if you have to diet for 6 months and then it takes a few months to fully recover, it leaves you with these very short off seasons if you plan on being an annual competing bodybuilder. So it's a great way to stay focused and keep your weight in check by being in a weight class restricted strength sport. It keeps you lean and it keeps you focused on progressive overload, and it's really fun. And it's a nice break from, going up to a judge after a show and finding out, why you placed the way you did because who showed up and their opinion, and then they thought maybe your color was better or the lighting in the center of the stage was slightly better. It's as much as I love bodybuilding, it's kind of a subjective sport, and you have to really kind of just let go of what happens on the stage. In a meet, you can quibble about whether or not you hit depth, but in the end, you either squatted the weight or you didn't. It's a different feel. It's nice. There's less stress related to it for me, at least. So yeah, I think they're a great fit. And then as far as me, so I love anything related to lifting a barbell, and ever since I first got into lifting, watching Olympic weightlifters put up more than my squat over their head and stand up with it just made me feel like these guys were the gods of the weight room. And I've always had a little bit of a fascination with that. And I have kind of tried my hand at it recently. And I'm really not that good. But I expected that powerlifting and Olympic lifting would go hand in hand, and they'd be a better match, both being strength sports in a similar format, than powerlifting and bodybuilding. But to be honest, it's a whole different animal. The amount of technique involved, the amount of mobility involved, the velocity component to the lifts means that there's some pretty different things that happen. And you have to take a pretty different approach to programming than you'd think. There's so much more technical mastery required. Yeah, so that's been quite the task that I wouldn't even say I've had to juggle, but that I've asked my coach, Adam Story, who does my programming, to juggle. He's had to become a powerlifting / Olympic lifting coach, and then, at least tolerate me doing curls every once in a while. So
I actually wanted to pick up on one thing you said there of the fact that the sports are very much, all 3 of them really, the realization of the momentum that you've built from the training up until that point, rather than kind of, obviously there is a contribution of how you perform on the day, but I think it's very much within a threshold as opposed to really how much preparation you've done. And then even if you have a bad day, you might lose 5%, for example. With the what you said about, so you have a program that would revolve around a squat, a bench, a horizontal press, and a deadlift. But then, as you said, the rules do change very much when you're weightlifting. Do you have to then almost take a whole new focus, or make everything revolve around a central component of the velocity and the training the technique, or do you still keep in the squat, the bench, the deadlift as the sort of cornerstones of your program?
Well, there's a number of ways to approach it. I think the way that okay, I'm not going to try to go over every way you can approach it, but I will say that the way we've approached it with some relative success has been that you have kind of a focus of your training given where you are in the competition season. So, if you're going to get on the Olympic lifting platform, which I've done 3 times now, and if you're going to get on the powerlifting platform, obviously the training blocks are going to look different when you're 6 weeks out from an Olympic lifting meet rather than a powerlifting meet. So essentially you put something kind of on the back burner. So when you're close to an Olympic lifting meet, my squats became high bar half the time instead of low bar like I normally squat. And my sumo deadlift volume goes down and my clean pull kind of deadlift goes up. And then I spend, 2 of my 4 or 5 workouts a week strictly on the Olympic lifts, and sometimes 3. And then basically I've just got 1 day to bench to kind of keep that pattern. And then most of my time goes into practicing technique on the Olympic lifts. And then the flip side of that, when I get close to an Olympic lifting meet, the Olympic lifts take a backseat and are only 1 day a week. And then I'm benching and squatting 2 to 3 times a week and deadlifting 1 to 2 times a week. So I think it really just comes down to intelligent block training, kind of thinking what transfers to what. Obviously the big gap in Olympic lifting is that it's not going to build your bench. But you'd be surprised how little transfers from a squat and a deadlift to a successful clean and jerk and snatch. The best clean and jerk I've done is 115 or 116. No, 115. And yes, that 1 kilo difference makes a difference. Yet I've squatted, 222 in the gym and 220 in a meet. And if you were to look at a good Olympic lifter who can squat 220, he's probably clean and jerking 170, if they have a good transfer from one to the other. So yeah, it either means that I'm unnecessarily strong for my skill level, which is the case, or I'm just a really shitty Olympic lifter, which it's probably a little bit of both.
I think it's kind of a mismatch between an Olympic lifter wanting to have as low a possible squat for their Olympic lifts compared to a powerlifter who just wants a bigger squat possible, and then becoming as efficient as a percentage of your maxes versus just having big maxes for the sake of it, at least when you consider the squat to be your favorite assistance isolation movement as opposed to a full lift.
Exactly.
So kind of leading on from that, Eric, you've more or less covered it, but I think everybody's very keen to know how the bigger names in fitness, like how they currently train. So obviously, like at the minute, there's RPE, there's DUP, there's West Side, there's kind of all these concepts that get thrown around and people tend to categorize themselves into one camp. So do you want to just briefly both discuss how you train at the minute, and then have you tried any of these, any of the more recent popularized methods like RPE or undulating periodization? So Alberto, do you want to go first, since Eric's just spoken about it briefly?
Well, I'm doing the DUPs, as the kids say, and it's actually a program that Eric put together. Helms go, dude, Helms go. The main reason I'm running that right now is because I think my squat is probably the one movement that's just really far behind from a technical standpoint. So it's letting me squat often, but other than that, I'm not doing too much volume for my legs, and it's letting me focus a lot on my upper body stuff. So that's what I'm doing now. I think I've done a little bit of everything at some point. I've done powerlifting specific programs, if you can call them that. I've done Shaiko in the past. So yeah, I've experimented with a lot of things in my youth, but I think, to tell you the truth, the programs that have worked the best for me, it's actually, and that's one of the reasons I'm running this current program, is it's usually been, the simple stuff that keeps me from making the errors I'm prone to do. And I think my biggest one is I tend to be a volume junkie. In this program, because the frequency is so high, I feel like I'm doing a lot of volume, but I'm really not. So, again, the programs that I do run, typically they're things that I find fun, but at the same time, they also, they're there to cover my ass. I'm still prone to making these, I guess you could call them crimes of passion, because I love my training and I'm very attached to, the end result. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now. It's really simple and not sexy. Not at all.
I think it seems, I don't know, but Yusuf and I are both doing a DUP program which Eric wrote, so I imagine they're pretty similar. But how do you find the squatting multiple times a week? Was that something you were used to before you started that split, or is that a recent development?
I was squatting 3 times a week prior to that, so it wasn't too big of a change. And I think, if anything, so long as I built up fairly early on, because my torso tends to be the limiting factor. Everything else on me is kind of made for a squat. It wasn't too much of an issue. I think if anything, the conventional deadlift right now that I'm doing quite frequently, because I've committed to doing that one just because I get so much carryover into my sumo when I do go back. No, it wasn't too hard. And I find a lot of fun to go in there and look forward to at least one of these big lifts every day, because again, everything else is just kind of mindless, sitting there curl. I mean, I can break it down and try to have this perfect form, but it's nowhere near as mentally engaging or frustrating at times, which is kind of fun as a squat or a deadlift.
So what about you, Eric? Are you doing a DUP program written by Eric Helms as well, or something different?
No, I think you could probably quantify what I'm doing as DUP as well, given that I have different focuses on each day of the week based on what I need to do, whether that's, I'm in very much in a powerlifting block right now, because I have a hip injury that prevents me from really doing the deep Olympic lifts, and that may be kind of the theme for my training from now on. But to not really get too much into that, I am on what you'd probably classify as a powerlifting program with 1 day a week where I do some power snatch, power clean, and jerk accessory work, which I've just found really keeps my shoulders healthy. Maybe because of that end range of motion, long muscle length, power development and strength development overhead, I bench max legal width for IPF, and I do it multiple times per week. And this is the first time ever in my career, and I've only been, getting older, that I've had no shoulder issues at all with that. So that's interesting anecdote. So I've kind of just kept it in, even though I may not be getting a lot better at the Olympic lifts anyway. So I'm going to take a step back from the question about my training, because like you said, everyone wants to know what certain people who may be more prominent in the industry are doing. And I think that's a bit of a pitfall, because they start to think that program A or program B or whatever the latest ebook is the answer. But I kind of give two conflicting pieces of advice to people all the time. First, I say, if you're going to start a program, just do it. Just follow it. And then I also tell people, reverse engineer that so that they understand. So it sounds like I'm telling them, figure out what the constituent parts are and change it. The reality is when you're new to training and you're still kind of hopping from ebook to ebook, like each one's the new golden nugget, you probably will just make it worse if you change it. But I do think you should understand why the program is what it is. Like 531 isn't 531. It's just a collection of lifts, a certain frequency, a certain intensity, and a certain level of volume. And I think it's important to understand that. So at least when you don't feel comfortable programming, you can look at these different programs, maybe look at the total volume, maybe look at the frequency of training, maybe look at the intensities at what you're training at, and figure out which ones might bridge well together and which ones are similar to other programs you've had success with, because none of them are magic, and there's a reason why Berto and I have both done almost everything in terms of programming, is because it all works, so long as it's at least intelligently designed in some manner, is progressive, and you attack it with 3Ds, it's going to produce progress. But hopping around a lot, especially in your earlier years, but still actually spending enough time on it. When I say hopping around, I don't mean every 2 weeks, I mean like every 4 months. Gives you an experience with a broad range of different ways of approaching training, and you get a better sense of what happens to work for you to produce an efficient adaptation.
I think a big realization for me was, I think for a long time I tried to identify myself with one specific approach. So I was like, I'm the guy that does 531, or I'm the guy that does West Side. Sticking with something for a while and letting it run its course, and then when it stopped working, switching to something else, I think definitely allows you to learn training from different points of view, and just taking it as, I train to be a better powerlifter, or I train to be a better bodybuilder, rather than I'm somebody who does DUP because that's what Lane Norton did, for example.
I think for me as well, that delayed the process of me moving on to something. I would end up, because I felt it was almost like a hit to my pride if I identify with doing a certain thing and then realise it doesn't work, but I feel like I'm almost losing a part of myself by ceasing doing that, so it would keep me stuck in wrong directions for slightly longer than it should have, as opposed to being open and inclusive as you guys profess.
Because it's very natural and normal and healthy to seek acceptance from your social peers and to be part of a group. That's just what humans do. I think that happens within those subgroups. Like people, they like the philosophy, or they read something that someone does and they go, that makes sense, I'm going to be a Shaiko lifter or whatever. And that's okay, that's good. It's good to get that community support, but at the same time to be able to understand that you can hold yourself back by just aligning yourself in a more fanatical version of that, and kind of being the disciple of, the HIIT disciple, or the Arnold Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding disciple, or whatever it is. It's that really can just prevent you from trying other aspects of training. And I would say, just like you guys we're both recently on an auto-regulated RPE-based program. Even though in both your cases we decided, we should take a step away from that. I think that was very valuable because it creates awareness. You see what are the things that came from that are beneficial and what maybe we can improve upon. And I think that is more valuable than did your squat go up 6 kgs or 7 for a long-term career.
Definitely. I think switching over from an RPE-based template, which is very, you're not really sure what you're doing, and you're always reading yourself and how you respond to decide what the next set is. Switching from that to something which is just, I'm doing this many reps for this many sets, this amount of weight, it makes you just appreciate having a program to follow, apart from anything. One question I wanted to ask you, based on what you were saying about benching and it having a stress on your shoulders or having a hip injury, how do you find that you manage the increased frequency on the bigger lifts in terms of mobility? Do you find that you need to increase the amount of soft tissue work and that kind of thing you do? Do you have like a mobility routine you follow, or do you just kind of adapt and let it take its course?
A little bit of both. So in my specific case, I was seeing a physio once a week. I was even experimenting with a chiropractor. I was doing half an hour of soft tissue work and mobility drills every day, and I was beat up bad when my hip was at its worst. And it really came down to just not realizing what the core root of what was bothering my hip was. Sometimes it's just one big thing, and it doesn't matter how much you do of all this other stuff. And for me, when I finally actually got some scans done, I confirmed what I suspected, that I did have actually FAI, which is femoral acetabular impingement, which just means that basically either the lip of your acetabulum, your hip, or the femur, where those two areas get closest, have developed bone growth that are impacting each other and messing up the soft tissues around them, the labrum, and just all the surrounding musculature. And that shifts your motor pattern, and then you get compensatory injuries. Like I was feeling all kinds of IT band knee pain and lower back pain on the side of my hip, on the side of my body that my hip injury wasn't. So I was, torsioning in the squat to get depth. And once I understood that, and once I just said, well, I basically can't go deep, we did a cycle of training where I was just doing box squats, well above parallel to start, with the goal of saying, let's see how far down we can work it and find out where the exact angle of squat I can go without messing up the impingement. Cut out all the deep Olympic lifts, and then all of a sudden, I felt like I could just walk into the gym, throw on my max, and squat every day if I wanted to. On a box at least. All of my issues just went away. My lower back pain was gone. My deadlift started progressing again. My squat came back up. I was able to deadlift more than once every 2 weeks. So for me, it was kind of one of these things where I was like trying to build a sandcastle wall to stop the tide coming in. I just couldn't stop it because I was literally slamming my femur onto my labrum every time I would go deep. And it doesn't matter if I can get my glutes to fire, if that's going to happen, right? So anyway, now I've found that I can basically squat at meat depth with a box as much as I want to, and as long as I keep myself from messing with loads that might produce failure on heavy squats, because I don't really have an option. If I miss it and go depth, I need to either rely on fantastic spotters or just kick myself in my labrum. If I'm smart with my squats, and if I don't do the deep Olympic lifts, I am 100% fine, and the frequency is no issue. That said, I still do movement drills, I still do warm-ups, I still make sure that I feel a good mind-muscle connection, and I do give almost all of my clients some form of mobility drills. And they all look pretty similar because most of my clients do two things. They lift heavy things, and then they sit in front of a computer with terrible posture at least 6 hours a day. So yeah, I focus on spending a little more time getting them moving before they move heavy weights. And mobility is an interesting thing. I've talked about it before, but essentially you need the mobility you need, not necessarily more than that. You don't need to become a ninja or a yogi by the time you squat, and that could actually have detrimental effect if you're really working on the kind of a long muscle length flexibility side of it too much. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much of quote-unquote mobility is neuromuscular, and just getting your body in a place of having a good awareness of itself and moving in certain areas. So like, the stuff we think of glute activation maybe is just our bodies getting used to proper knee tracking. And yeah, you do have to fire your glute for that to happen, but maybe it's more of just being aware of where your knee is in space, under load, in certain patterns. Sure, some of it might be soft tissue, at least we're just feeling better, but I think a lot of it is actually just kind of that holistic, full-body neuromuscular kind of awareness that I think is very valuable, even if, the reasons why we thought mobility worked were different before.
I think there's something critical that you mentioned there of the same principle coming back to reverse engineering the problem, working out what it actually was. And so with your hip pain, as you said, it only started to fix when you reverse engineered it, found what the actual cause was, and then been able to adjust your programming as a result. And I think a lot of people see things on MWOD and just kind of haphazardly do mobility without any real focus on what their specific restrictions will be. You know, just get the foam roller out and roll around on it without some kind of direction. And I think as a result, they're probably going to not get the most out of what they could be with mobility.
One thing I'd like to add, because you brought up frequency. I think for the longest time I identified myself as one of those guys that just couldn't deadlift that frequently. And I go back to the videos of that specific time frame, and the reason I would hurt when I would deadlift too frequently is because I just was doing it wrong. So I think just kind of how Eric mentioned, in that quite often we look into mobility and sometimes even joint supplements. It's like guys will ask me, so what can I take for my joints? And it's like, you know what? I think more than anything, I really want to see how you're moving in the weight room. And I can almost guarantee you, adjusting what you're doing in there, it's probably going to pay off way more than doubling your fish oil intake or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of little things that I think probably, this is the longest I've gone without some kind of, major injury. And I think a lot of it has to do with just more self-awareness in the weight room. And it's little things. Like, I'm such a form Nazi sometimes. Like, if I see a guy rowing and his anterior shoulders coming in, I'm like, oh my God, dude, you have issues going on there. I could never do that. Maybe too much, but it's helped me stay healthy. And this is the most frequency I've used in certain regions of my body, and specifically with certain movements that you would label as high risk. So, I think it all goes back to healthy movement, and then we can start supplementing with all the other stuff.
Very interesting about the deadlift and the frequency, and I certainly feel I can't deadlift very frequently, but maybe I've got the same issue as yourself. I probably have, and I think, as you said, it comes back down to having the self-awareness and not taking things as a given, which is a pretty cool lesson. So I wonder if we can take a slightly different direction at the moment, because obviously we posted a Facebook status saying we're interviewing you guys, and there was a flood of questions about nutrition and what a day of eating looks like for you guys. And I think because Eric's pre-warned with not just listening to what Alberto Nunez does in a daily diet and just copying that, replicating it, hoping that you'll get silly lean, it would be good to get some insight on that. So Eric, do you want to go first?
Well, sure. To give some context, there was a 5-year period from when I first prepped for my first show to about halfway through my 2011 off season for my last bodybuilding prep, where I would say 9 out of 10 days I was weighing and tracking all my food. And the days when I couldn't weigh, I was eyeballing and entering it. And there was a point where I was still using FitDay for all you old schooler guys. And on a cable modem back in like 2009, it would take about 10 minutes for my FitDay custom food list to load, just to tell you how in deep I was and how OCD it was. And when I switched to my Fitness Pal on the insistence of my fellow coaches who were like, dude, it's just way better. You don't need to save these custom foods. Everyone is entering their foods. You got this community database. You can just find everything. It was like breaking up with a girlfriend I'd been with for 6 years. So given that I had that background, I like to tell people, without trying to sound arrogant about it, that when I look at foods, it's kind of like when Neo looks at the world and he sees the ones and zeros in the Matrix. I can't not know how many calories and macros I have by the end of the day. And I even test myself every once in a while. I had my good buddy Scott, who I'm doing a PhD with, he had these 2 yams that were at his desk. And I was like, and he was like, he tested me. He's like, how big do you think these are? And I was like, that one looks like it's about 65 grams. And he was like, what about this one? I was like, I think they're almost the same size. And we busted out my food scale, and one was 66 and the other was also 66. So just to give a little bit of a reliability study to my madness. So anyway, that said, I'm in the off season. I've let go a lot of my OCD behaviors, and I do what is very sustainable and easy for me to do, which is putting myself at about maintenance or slightly above it most of the time. And then when meets come around, getting back to maintenance just to make sure that I'm at the body weight I know I can be my strongest at, which is right about 90 to 92 in terms of my Wolf score. And I basically eat, on average per week, I'll give you the weekly average, about 32 to 3,300 calories per day. And I try to get in at least 1.6 grams per kg of protein. And it sometimes gets as high as about 1 gram per pound on a day-to-day basis. And I make sure I get a couple servings of fruit and vegetables every day. And besides that, I pretty much just fill it in. Some days I will hit like 4,000 calories. Like I typically go to a little quiz night with my buddies at a pub on Tuesday. And I have a margarita pizza by myself. I might even have a cider. Oh God. And then, some beer battered chips. So like those days, my calories gets pretty high. And then typically the day afterwards, they're down around, 2,400 or something like that. And then the week they average out. And for the last 2 years, I've been within 90 to 92.5 And, for me, as much as people struggle against the idea, I don't think regular weight gain should be a part of my progress. It should be seeing how my body comp changes at different weights and making sure I'm getting stronger. And I can say this is the best I've ever looked at about 91 kg and the strongest I've ever been. So it's certainly working for me.
Awesome. We appreciate the conversion to kilos, by the way.
No problem.
Everything's been in kilograms. Alberto, do you want to go next?
I like how he ended that. It works for me, bro. Well, I'm just coming off a contest season, so my situation's a bit different than Eric's. I'm just trying to find my happy intake right now. I think I'm definitely out of that danger zone. It's been about 4 weeks now, and I've probably put on about 5 pounds. And 5 pounds for me, 5 pounds off contest weight is enough to I feel good. I feel good, and my energy levels are way more stable at this point. And I think I'm kind of in a similar stage as Eric, where, I do want to see some weight gain at a certain point, but the way I like to compare, when I decide to, okay, let's move on and start adding some more food, it's the whole cup analogy. And it's basically, I have this big of a cup. This is my current weight at 165 or so. And then, when that gets filled up and I'm having a hard time getting any stronger, what I'll do is I'll start to intentionally move up in weight and I guess switch from a V6 engine to a V8 engine. So I'm hanging around here. Hopefully, maybe I'll do a few meets at 165 and then eventually move on and become a really bad 181er. I don't know the conversions to that. But right now it's very straightforward. I have 4 protein feedings a day and my calories are anywhere from, depends on how bad I've been, anywhere from 34 to 4,100 calories a day. Somewhere in there's my happy place. And, depending on how much volume there is in that training cycle and how active I am. Typically I'm not a breakfast guy. I was during prep, but it's funny how that changes right away. So at this point, I'm typically fasted until noon or so. And I'll have a Quest bar or 2 and then head over to the gym and eat right after and then eat a large dinner. And that's basically how I do things. But yeah, very simple. And I kind of like Eric, we've kind of learned to, I think we all started with these pretend rules. And, the longer we've done this, the more we've minimized our approach in terms of, how specific we get. And I guess, again, there's like 4 rules now or something like that. Calories, protein intake, and do it often. But to tell you the truth, I have found this to be more effective than any other period in my life where, either, one, I felt like I had to gain weight, which I think that was a rule for both Eric and I. If we didn't gain weight during a week, it was time to move on. But,
failure of a week.
Yeah. And I've been weight training for 15 years now, so it's not like I'm looking for surplus. I'm just more so looking to not create any unintentional fat loss and eat enough to progress.
I think it's interesting, Alberto, that you mentioned the shift between prep and off-season and your preferences to when you eat. Because I think something that we've noticed in both ourselves and with clients as well is the neurosis that comes with A, calorie deficit and dieting, and then B, low levels of body fat, and how that feeds into kind of obsessing over meal frequency, obsessing over the specifics, and then also hunger becoming much more of a pervasive issue in terms of the distance between the plan that you're trying to be on and then what you actually end up doing. I imagine with coaching a lot of bodybuilders in their prep season, how do you go about encouraging and improving people's adherence to a plan and dealing with A, the neuroses that come with a contest prep, and then B, the hunger as it kind of linearly gets worse and worse towards the end?
I'll take first crack at that. I want to say, first off, we've kind of talked about our approaches a little bit, and you guys know kind of how I've approached your nutrition. But there can, and will be differences between clients. Like, I do have some guys who are hitting all their macros on a day-to-day basis within 5 grams and weighing everything because they're in the middle of a contest prep. And then I have other guys who have a calorie range and a protein target because they're not. So there should be different approaches with different clients. Now, in the specific case of someone who has to get really lean or diet down for a show, neuroses, like you guys said, are pretty much going to happen to some degree. And it's just a matter of managing them rather than trying to avoid them. And I would say that there are good neuroses and there's bad neuroses. I try to tell clients, look, especially during the reverse diet period, that we don't just want to try to get rid of all of those little crazy weird things you developed over the course of the last 6 months, because the reason you developed them in the first place is to give yourself a sense of security, control, and structure while you're doing something that's pretty stressful and is very, very intimidating, and that your body is going to fight you during the process of doing it. So there needs to be kind of an awareness of, why am I doing it? Is it okay? Is it getting in the way of other behavior? making me more or less stressful, and then approaching it from kind of that angle. And my mic was, did you guys hear me?
Yeah, it broke up a little bit, but we got the gist of what you said. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, big picture thing is evaluate things as they go, and let go of any and all neurotic behaviors that aren't serving you, and realize that some are actually going to give you a sense of comfort. And then really it's just kind of a case-by-case, week-by-week basis, and learning to accept the fact that if your goal is to get on stage between 5 to 7% body fat, you're going to have some of these things crop up, and it's a matter of managing versus saying there's a magic diet that can make you not have them, for sure.
Yeah, and it takes a few cracks at it too. You're not going to get it right the first time. And I think, people look at their preps and they're like, well, I've improved in terms of, conditioning, muscularity, but there's also that other aspect of, what happens outside of the physique itself. You just get better every time. Everything that Eric mentioned, you get way better at knowing what to anticipate from yourself, what you're prone to doing. And I think it's just one of those things you have to do a few times. So if someone out there is listening and they just got done with their first prep and they're like, well, I'm never going to do that again because of this, and that, it gets better every time. One of these days, my goal is to sneak a prep behind Melissa's back and just tell her that we have a show this Saturday. So one day, I might be aiming too high, but hopefully.
Cool. She's going to see you. You know that,
right? Lights off, dude. Lights off. We're both shy.
With regard to the hunger and the severity of that, do you think that's more to do with the length of the time and under deficit, or the severity of the deficit, or is it just to do with kind of total body fat? Eric,
yes.
What do you think?
The answer to that is yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, you can find guys who do the more old school approach and diet 12 to 16 weeks and they get decently lean, but they experience some crazy cravings. They may just have a slightly different pathway and route. It's because maybe their diet was very restrictive, and maybe they felt that kind of acute hunger because their calories were so low, and the rate at which their body fat was decreasing, that probably even has an impact as well. And if you look at studies on rate of weight loss, you start to see some things happen, even though they may not necessarily be hitting a body fat level that you think is really, really low yet. All those things impact it. And if you were to ever kind of like map out all of the things that were related to hunger on like just kind of like a brain chart, you'd need a piece of poster paper that would take up a full wall, and then that'd be 10% of it. So it's extremely complex. It has behavioral, environmental, social, psychological, and physiological roots, and they all interplay. There's, like I said, that you can manage it, and you can definitely get to a place of acceptance with it if you know it's normal, know it's going to happen. And that's probably honestly your biggest tool, is just kind of knowing, yeah, there's some suffering is normal and it's not bad, and it's going to happen during prep, and you're going to get food focused. But if you can kind of remind yourself, I still have food, I'm not going to die, and when I wake up tomorrow, I get my macros all over again, you can really kind of avoid some of that stuff. Because there are definitely people out there in the world, not necessarily sympathetic to bodybuilders, who wake up the next day and there aren't macros, and it's not their choice, It's not just a matter of not eating more. It's a matter of, I just don't have food because I'm extremely, poor.
I think I remember hearing Alberto saying that, like, after a meal, even though you're shredded and hungry and worrying about like the last grain of rice, that you're still nourished and still alive and everything's still fine. It's just, you're exaggerating something and making the hunger seem like a massive problem. So again, when we asked if anybody had any questions on Facebook, another common thread that people were mentioning was kind of 3DMJ as an online business, and obviously you're kind of in the spotlight at the minute with coaching a lot of big names in the both natural bodybuilding and powerlifting, and people wanting to know how you built your name as 3DMJ, and then what difficulties that you overcame in getting to where you are today.
Yeah, I think initially we really just wanted to help out the local folks around here. Everyone was just so behind. I think my second season, if I can just go back and try to recollect, I think I'd say roughly 90% of competitors were cutting water backstage. So yeah, they were in need of help, and we thought we could help. And the funny thing is, I think it was more than anything a timing. Me and Eric were quite active on the bodybuilding.com forums, and especially the contest prep section. I think we were just really fortunate in that, again, our introduction to bodybuilding, our initial contacts were all the right people. You know, we were raised right, you could say, for the lack of a better way of putting it. And we were able to pass it on in an efficient manner. So I think people, initially, we didn't even want to be coaches. I think more than anything, we wanted to be a magazine for the sport. But, you know, when you're a magazine, you put out articles, you put out information, and then people started to inquire, well, can you help me? And it kind of just, you know, in a very organic fashion, just kind of grew. And I think that's the main reason we've done so well. We haven't intentionally searched for growth. If anything, we've tried to stun it over time, you know, slow it down quite a bit in order to keep quality. And I think that's been the biggest factor, is it, you know, just kind of letting things take its natural course. And, you know, when I look back to what started 3D Muscle Journey, is basically the love that, you know, all four of us coaches just had for, you know, training and bodybuilding. So, yeah, you can't fake passion, as Ryan Doris would say. And I think people see that.
Yeah, I would have to echo everything that Berto's saying. You know, I mean, like, yeah, when we first started, we weren't planning on quitting our day jobs, you know. Like, we were very much like, hey, let's go to the local powerlifting meets, let's go to the local shows, let's interview the promoters, let's interview the athletes, let's, you know, write articles that are catered towards the natural athlete, and let's, you know, try to get some more awareness of you know, maybe some more evidence-based approaches to the sport and a more holistic approach. I think, you know, we've always been 3D Muscle Journey, you know, and kind of emphasizing that the four of us have all gotten so much out of bodybuilding in our outside of the gym, you know, and the way it's affected our personal growth, you know, becoming healthier, happier people who are making a more positive contribution to society, instead of just being like, yeah, I look good on my webcam kind of thing. So we've always been trying to figure out a way to bring that to people. So that's been an element of our writing. It's been part of our mission statement. And then, you know, the coaching side of it was minor. I think our first year, we made like $400 or something like that. You know, it was something, and we were happy about that, you know. And the coaching just kind of grew organically, like Berto said. And there was a point where our team regular Skype meetings were all about how do we manage the number of referrals we're getting? How do we supply our demand without each one of us getting overburdened and actually losing the balance that we're preaching? So yeah, I think to be perfectly honest, in an industry that often has people who feel like they have to portray an image, just being ourselves has probably been one of the best unintentional marketing campaigns we've ever done.
I think that authenticity certainly comes across with all four of you, and the fact that your growth has been organic and has been fueled by the passion for it, that also comes across in the quality of the stuff that you do, rather than being driven purely for profit, as you see a lot of names in the industry. So another question was also, during that growth, how did you develop the time management and the systems so efficiently with so many online clients to consistently produce results without getting overburdened?
I'll take that one. We also had the fortune of the four of us. Yeah, we're like brothers. Honestly, they're just as close to me as any member of my family, these guys. And we clicked great as a team. I don't think I've ever had a group of four guys who I've met, who have worked together, who there isn't like, yeah, these two guys really like each other. These guys are okay. There's this little dual click here. Yeah, you know, Brad talks behind Jeff's back about him, but it's okay because he has birthday. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, we have a very, very healthy kind of communication set, and I think that's rare. But more importantly than that, we all think differently, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. Like, Jeff is very much down to earth and also at the same time emotionally connected guy. And then Brad is very much a practical application. Like, you know, he's the mechanic to my engineer sometimes, you could say. Berto is just an absolute workhorse and also understands the way people work together. And I tend to be a bit of a visionary, I would suppose. So I think any one of us as individuals, we would be terrible at this business. You know, Jeff would have never actually started 3D Muscle Journey because he thought it wouldn't be realistic. Berto would have taken on too many clients, burned out, and became like a track cyclist. Brad would have been too involved in the process and never gotten outside of just coaching like 3 athletes in Portola, which is like half the population there. And I would have tried to take on the world and eventually just got burned out. So the fact that each one of us could recognize and acknowledge and see each other's strengths and weaknesses, I think has allowed us to have a very, very balanced approach. So yeah, we've had a lot of meetings where between the 4 of us, there's at least one intelligent person. And we've been able to create systems by which we know how many clients each one of us could take on. We figured out an equitable way to pay for people who train different amounts of clients because each one of us has different lives. And we've also at the same time made it so that you're not working with Jeff or Brad or Alberto or Eric. But even though we have this very strong individual coach-client relationship, because you have to, because of the nature of the sport, we also know how to bring on the whole team. And we have, regular meetings. We do basically a round-robin men's group via Skype and video every week, and then have a monthly meeting via Skype. And then I do quarterly presentations on the research, and we spend as much time with each other as we can to make sure that we approach things as a four-headed beast and not a fractionated too many chefs in the kitchen, which it could be, very easily have been, but it's not.
I think the thing that seems to set 3DMJ apart from other online companies is just how consistently you produce athletes at the top of their game. We don't have the same natural bodybuilding scene here in the UK, but Muscle Mayhem and things like that in the US, where the top lineup of athletes are all, he's 3DMJ, he's 3DMJ, he's 3DMJ, and then the nationals as well, and how many of the top level powerlifters are all coached by yourselves as well. So yeah, that's really cool. So we just had one more question emailed to us by this random guy. I don't know whether you know Bryce Lewis, but he wanted to know any plans for the future of 3DMJ, and what you've got planned for the future, basically.
Well, I would say first, hey Bryce. Second, I have really been enjoying a lot of helping really intelligent upcomers who want, not just intelligent, but compassionate and passionate intelligent upcomers who want to follow in a similar path that we've done and make their passion of helping others their career in this little avenue of strength sport and physique sport. We've had a great time working with NPS, which is a group of primarily Australian natural bodybuilders who made a really cool coaching business out there. And then the Strength Athlete, TSA, which is, Bryce, Honey, Eric, and Reed Frisbee. I've had a great time collaborating with other coaches, and you guys, Propanefitness, collaborating with other coaches, sharing philosophies, and really doing what we can to provide more caring, compassionate, evidence-based coaches to the community so that people can find someone who they really click with and can help them succeed, and just to help people do what they want in life. I would love everyone to have a job that they love. So I've actually been enjoying doing a lot of kind of train the trainer type of things instead of just, train the athlete, which I think is pretty cool. Berto?
It's kind of scary when you actually brought that up. So in a few years, where do you see 3D Muscle Journey? That's how I echoed in my head. I don't think me and Eric would have guessed that it would have turned out like this at this point. Not at all. You would have told us this back in 2010 when we were doing this seminar in Portola with, I think the average age there must have been like 60 something. We've come a long way. And I think much like Eric, that definitely interests me, but I think more than anything, what I really have enjoyed is, we talked about this earlier, how bodybuilding and powerlifting, they're kind of meshing together. I really look forward to being part of that functional strength, aesthetic, I don't know what you'd call it, movement. I think it's kind of getting burned out on the bodybuilding thing, but I think now that, I guess strength training or just powerlifting is more accepted by our community, I really want to shift my focuses towards that a bit. And that's just me personally, just because I can see myself at some point starting a foundation where, we take a bunch of young kids from I guess, as we would call it here, the hood, and, teaching them to lift weights and set goals and do things like that. And I can't really see ourselves doing that with bodybuilding. But with powerlifting, I can certainly see myself renting a bus and taking these kids to meets. And so in the future, that's probably where I would like to be, is probably, get to the point where it's like, dude, you need to start giving some of this back. And I think, for something that I guess started as a natural bodybuilding company, a sport that's often, touted as being selfish and a lot of negative connotations with it, it'd be really cool to say this is where we ended up. So giving back. I want to be big enough to the point where we can actually just give back.
That is a great cause. Didn't expect to hear that for sure. Guys, thank you so much for taking out the time to speak to us. How can we follow more of your content and subscribe to your stuff?
Well, we've got that there, YouTube's. And I think that's just youtube.com/team3dmj, all one word, I believe.
And here's what we're going to do, guys. I'm really going to get on everyone, and we're just going to start putting up more videos. Even if they're like, I guess, run through Q&As. I think people enjoy those. But we definitely have to get back on it, because I do think people appreciate what we put out, even if it's just repeating what other people are already saying. Is kind of like, I think at this point it's like a stamp of approval. It's like, okay, yes, okay, you know, squatting's not bad for my knees and such. But we definitely need to get on that, Eric. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I just want to put it out there that I just did my PhD proposal like literally 3 days ago, and that's like a pretty big hurdle. So you'll have to pardon me if sometimes I decide, you know, maybe I should work on my PhD proposal instead of just peeling back a layer.
Yeah, Eric's like Eminem. He drops an album like every 2 years or so and gets everyone really excited.
Well, I don't want to be too frequent, you know. You lose the allure, you know.
Can definitely confirm the YouTube channel is the best source, I think, of concise information on diet and training. Very thoughtful and considered words, and certainly you can't really do better.
Something about a pyramid, or
something about a pyramid.
Some pyramid thing.
Heard that's quite good.
Oh, the pyramid scheme. That's right. Yeah.
Multi-level marketing for nutrition.
Is that what it was?
Right. Yeah, I'm going to try to sell you Amway. Exactly.
Yeah, that is one thing you've got to put up with. Eric is really big on those kind of health drinks, but you just got to...
Herbalife.
You just got to ignore it and
horrible.
Listen to what he's kind of trying to say behind all that.
You know, the problem with sarcasm, there's someone out there who's going, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I probably got to stay away from those guys.
Yeah, we're joking, just to clarify. Guys, it's been great. Thank you very much for sparing the time to speak to us. Yeah, so that's it from us. And guys, we'll hopefully have you on again sometime in the future. And that's everything from Propane Fitness Podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.